Let's talk Ukraine, everybody. As you can see in the news notes, Ukraine, as we recently have discussed on Liberty Conspiracy Live, it looks like the heads of most nations in NATO and the EU believe they can bolster their economies, or at least their own bank accounts, by extending the Ukraine war and by getting their nations to fund arms manufacturing. Well, guess what, everybody? Likely these politicians also have friends at corporations that will benefit from NATO, the EU, or their own nation's funding of their particular line of endeavor. This approach will not bolster the economy in the long term. As I mentioned, it's Keynesianism. It's this idea of a war economy that people might have taught you in high school. That's what brought America out of the Great Depression, World War II, which is bogus. Just read the work of Robert Higgs. He talks all about it, started really putting out information on it in the mid-1990s, around 95 or so. As I noted here, this approach regarding trying to maintain either their national economies, I don't think they're really intent on that. That will fail. And I think what it is they're trying to maintain their own economies, their personal pocketbooks. This approach will not bolster the economy in the long term because it is drawing money away from personal choice in a free market and targeting it at arms makers. This is not bettering living standards. It harms the productive creation of things that people might want to better their living standards. Here we see Dialogue Works' Nima Al-Khorshid with Colonel Lawrence Wilkerson from last night. We see Dialogue Works stressing, as the Colonel does, the same idea that this is the EU tactic. So I want to show you this because this is the second group of people that I've seen confirming what I've been suspecting for a while, that this is the intent of the EU leaders. They think they're going to now having a war economy, or if they don't think they're going to bolster their own nation's economy in, say, I don't know, England or France or Italy or Germany, then they think that they're going to bolster their own pocketbooks. I think that's the story. Here is Nima and here's Lawrence Wilkerson as he mentions this. He's right on it.
Of whether they were really serious about that or not, because I couldn't believe they would be that stupid to actually eviscerate the best social systems on the face of the earth in order to fight a figment of their imagination. But now I understand, stupid me, I should have seen this. They are going to revive their economies on the back of this war. And then the threat becomes, Nima, not Russia, but them.
Actually, we had the head of, MI6 saying that they're going to continue, cooperation with Ukraine, and they're going to continue to stay in Ukraine somehow. When they're talking about cooperation, it doesn't mean that you're going to get back to your country. You're going to stay there as they're in Odessa, maybe Nikolaev, and those cities, important cities. And I don't see Russia accepting any of this.
I'm sure that Mossad's saying the same thing because it's a great battlefield for them to experiment in. It's not like Gaza or Syria or Lebanon. It's a real battlefield. It's not a slaughterhouse. It's a real battlefield. Well, it's turning into a slaughterhouse because of Russia's extremely powerful military over a defeated military. But Mossad wants to be there because weapons lessons, tactics lessons, everything, that's the place to learn them now.
So basically, Ukraine is turning into a, experiment ground.
Think about 1936 and the Spanish Civil War and Hitler testing everything from Stukas to tanks in Spain. I mean, think about that. And Ernest Hemingway on the battlefield and lots of other people, all manner of folks in there trying to figure out whether the communists were worth supporting, trying to figure out whether Hitler was really serious about what he was threatening to do, and at the same time writing about it and studying it and painting pictures of it and everything, and taking photos of it and putting them in the newspapers all over the world. Go back and look at that time period and see how many stupid people there were. You could have stopped Hitler in his tracks anywhere in there. You could have stopped Franco in his tracks anywhere in there at a lot less expense than you finally had to do in 1939, 40, 41. But we didn't. And America was hugely to blame for that too. But mostly the Europeans were to blame for it because they let it happen. On their territory, on their watch, they let it happen. And one of the most guilty culprits of all was the guy we praised today for having gotten his act together and done something about it. And that was Winston Churchill.
Exactly. Exactly. You can just ask the Australians what they think of Winston friggin' Churchill. He was a eugenicist, by the way. He spoke at the first World Eugenics Conference in England, Winston Churchill. Yeah, real class act that guy was. Unbelievable. So let's talk a little bit more about the seizure of the Russian assets, and then we'll go back to the rhetoric of people like Lindsey Graham. Unbelievable. And I'll show you the long-standing record of people like Lindsey Graham pushing to try to characterize Russia as a terrorist state. So here is the situation. Coming up, it looks like tomorrow or the next day, there will be a so-called emergency vote regarding the seizure of the Russian assets. And as we mentioned, Euroclear was unwilling to seize those assets unless they got some sort of legal backing if the Russians came after them on an international legal level, because they likely would lose in a court case. So they turned to the European Central Bank. The ECB last week said, no, not going to do it. But people inside the ECB and the EU, like von der Leyen and others, said, I've got an idea, or we've got an idea. How about if you, Euroclear, can get backed by the separate central banks of each of the countries? And Euroclear said, you know, that's kind of a good idea. Maybe we could do that. So they're going to vote on that tomorrow as a so-called emergency. Well, here is what Thomas Colby has to say, and it's been reprinted by Zero Hedge. Euroclear and the looming breach of trust. The European alliance financing the war in Ukraine is facing a new problem. 7 members of the European Union want to block the expropriation of the Russian central bank assets held at Euroclear. This puts the continuation of war financing at risk. At the same time, the specter of a financial crisis looms, one that would once again leave taxpayers footing the bill. Of course, again, they don't care because they can continue to borrow, just like they do here. The negotiation marathon between representatives of Ukraine, the EU, and the United Kingdom, with a U.S. delegation acting as mediator, continues in Berlin. As usual, it is accompanied by familiar phrases about progress on the road to peace and assurances that roughly 90% of the target has already been reached. That's their target, not the Russian target. They continue to push for things that the Russians at the outset repeatedly have said they will not accept, like some sort of security arrangement that is basically NATO without the name NATO on it. They would get, Ukraine would get NATO defense without being in NATO. That's exactly what the Russians don't want. Any peace treaty that is proposed would have to include the Russians as part of the security force in an international force inside what's left of Ukraine, and there won't be much left in a few weeks because they keep doing this. And they keep sending out corporate real estate people to discuss things that have to do with centuries of Russian ethnic history, families, and geography. They don't understand. They've got no concept because they're pure materialists. That's all they are. They're all Jared Kushners. How much weight this interim result actually deserves will become clear in the coming days. So where things stand, it looks like they've got this idea. They're going to try to take the money. They're doing the negotiations. And the Russians are saying, we're going to do this militarily. Do whatever you want. Euroclear could turn into a personal Waterloo for EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen. She is working at full throttle to convert the current crisis into a massive expansion of power for Brussels and thus for her commission. Hungary, Slovakia, and Belgium, already outspoken critics of expropriating Russian assets, are now joined by Italy, Bulgaria, Malta, and Cyprus. Resistance to Brussels' escalation push is growing by the day, which is why they want to do it as quickly as possible. Notably, this resistance coincides with a clear shift in timing. Since the United States effectively withdrew from financing Ukraine, not really, they're doing it through the back door through NATO, Europe's financial reality has come into view without cosmetic filters. With access to roughly 210 billion euros in Russian assets, they just want the money. And they know it's a quixotic quest. They know that they are going to end up with the money in the end if Ukraine fails. It'll go to their friends and their NGOs and their corporations. That's the way it's going to work. Or it'll go to the military industrial contractors that already get the contracts, and they'll say, well, we'll continue to fulfill the contracts, and we'll use that Russian money to fulfill the contracts, but we just won't send the weapons to Ukraine. We'll keep them for our EU military. Either way, the money's going to go to military contractors in the EU and the United States. That's the way it's going to work. What is being attempted is as simple as it is dangerous. These assets, partly government bonds, partly matured bond holdings in foreign currencies, are to be used as collateral for further loans. Europe is already trapped in a debt spiral and is tapping every resource for funding. Even the enemy is no longer off limits for London, Brussels. Ukraine would already be insolvent without credit guarantees. And this brings the debate over to the expanding Eurobonds. Formerly prohibited under EU law, Eurobonds are back on center stage, potentially reintroduced outright as European war bonds. So they are gearing up to fund all their funds, and they're going to do it by alarming people about Russia as much as possible. Just like we saw Ruta trying to tell people that, again, he says Putin's going to march right across the mountains himself. He's going to turn into the jolly green giant and crush everyone. Unbelievably stupid. Insane. And that brings us to, you got it, Lindsey Graham. Now, let me show you what Lindsey Graham was doing a number of years ago. If you do a search, this is what you come up with. Because if you wanted to find the news about Lindsey Graham saying that Russia is a terror state, and you did some searching, well, I had forgotten about it, and it just comes up anyway. It has here, you got it. Oh, look at this. 13 days ago, Ukraine expects stronger U.S. action against Russia, including terror sponsor designation. Well, this one, Graham Blumenthal introduced bill designating Russia a state sponsor of terrorism. Ah, that must be it, right? No, that's from 2024. Oh, so they've been doing this for a while. Yes, they have. They've been doing it for a long time. It's been such a long time. Yep. Here's another one. Yep. June of 2024. Senators want Russia declared state sponsor of terrorism. Of course they do. Richard Blumenthal, he knows all about heroism. He pretended he was in Vietnam. You know how cool that is? That's totally cool. You know, it's great to not just not go to Vietnam, but to pretend you went. That takes a lot of courage. That's the courage. It's sort of John Kerry-like, you know? So let's talk about this new proposal from Mr. Graham. Senator Graham and Dick Blumenthal are pushing once more to designate Russia as a terrorist state. Basically means nothing. It's just a resolution. But as we mentioned, and we're going to show it now, Rand Paul stood up against this. And thank goodness, because it's going to fail again. So here we go. Rand Paul gives speech rejecting Lindsey Graham's bill to designate Russia a state sponsor of terrorism. This is all the stuff that's going on in Washington. Maybe you'd like to live your own life. Here we go.
President, Senator from Kentucky. Reserving the right to object, designating Russia as a state sponsor of terrorism is a colossally bad idea, a dangerous provocation, and a roundabout way of allowing military strikes on Russian targets. If you doubt this, ask the Venezuelans. All of the kinetic strikes on Venezuelan boats are justified because they are designated as a terrorist sponsor. They have these fancy names. We call them designated terrorist organization, and therefore it's like a war, not quite a war, but they justify their attacks and they justify acting like there is a war with Venezuela by designating them as terrorists. Never underestimate Washington's ability to make things worse. In its insistence that Moscow be a permanent enemy of the U.S., the foreign policy establishment is pushing to impose more punitive measures on Russia, measures that may make globalists in Washington feel virtuous, but in reality will do nothing to help Ukraine, do nothing to bring peace in Europe, and do nothing to make Americans safer or more prosperous. In fact, if there's one thing more likely to disrupt the peace talks and make it less likely to find peace, it's simply labeling Russia as a terrorist nation. If you want to destroy the peace process, you should pass this legislation and shout it from the rooftops that you're calling Russia a terrorist nation if you want to disrupt the peace talks. This bill would designate Russia as a state sponsor of terrorism, directly undermines President Trump's diplomatic efforts to end the 4-year war in Ukraine. If you like the war in Ukraine, vote for this bill, because this bill will do everything possible to drive Russia away from the table. Our goal should be to seek de-escalation and stability in Europe, which will only come about by establishing working relations with Russians. None of this says that Russia isn't the aggressor. None of this says that Russia isn't doing bad things. They're in the middle of a war. Yes, they are the aggressor. But simply standing forth and showing how virtuous we are by calling them terrorists will do nothing to end the war and may well allow the war to continue.
I want to pause it there because that's a moment where I wish that, you can't dictate what someone else is going to say, but he is using American tax money to say these things. And by not amplifying the long, dark, checkered history of the United States getting involved with overthrow in Ukraine, working with some very, very dastardly people and engaging in terror campaigns inside Ukraine, false flags and coups, then he doesn't really give enough information. So I posted this on X. Lindsey Graham repeatedly has tried to classify Russia as a, quote, terror state, when Graham himself met numerous times, with Ole Tjanibak. You've heard me mention his name all the time, the leader of the neo-Nazi Svoboda Party. And if you're just listening in audio, that's Svodoba, Svoboda Party in Ukraine from 2013, as the U.S. and NATO and other European forces overthrew Viktor Yanukovych, spelled various ways, and installed the puppet regime that eventually saw Zelensky put into the top slot. And I just don't even understand how a human being can get to the point where they are like Lindsey Graham and they can just bald-facedly, repeatedly, just lie all day, constantly. That's what he does. Like, how do you get, how can you even exist? It's just bizarre. Is it like becoming an athlete? You just have to train your body to be that way? I don't know. I don't understand this. It's just crazy. Now we go back to round this off with the judge and Phil Rigiardi, because they've got some comments about this as they move into it.
Right. And for another term, I mean,
she'll have to spend her money trying to get the Constitution amended.
Yeah, incredible.
Which would be fruitless. Yeah. The chatters and social media, of course, are speculating that this war is to divert attention from something that's scheduled to happen on Friday. the release of the Epstein files.
Yeah, well, there's plausibility to that, but do you start a war to what? I mean, the files are going to be released anyway.
Right.
My
Right.
understanding. So what does he gain by that?
Yeah, well, what did Bill Clinton gain after he was interrogated before the grand jury, bombing an aspirin factory and killing a couple of janitors? Yeah, I mean, this is what presidents do. I mean, I am in full agreement with your entire analysis here. You know, in 2017, I don't know if it was his State of the Union address, but it was early on in his first term. He addressed a joint session of Congress, and he had this young man who he claimed was the true president. You can't make this up. He claimed was the true president of Venezuela. The guy's now a grad student in Miami, according to Anya Parampil, Max Blumenthal's wife. This fellow Juan Guaido, and he introduced Guaido at a joint session of Congress, and they gave him a sustained ovation. And he basically said, we're going to kick out Maduro and put Guaido back in. No mention of drugs at all. If he bases this thing on drugs, I don't think anybody will believe him, because his own Drug Enforcement Administration, you go to their webpage, says Venezuela is not a source or even an intermediary for cocaine or fentanyl.
Well, then you have to assume that he's going to go with his standby argument, which is what he wrote, that they've stolen our oil, they've stolen our property, they've stolen our land. And how are you going to make a case for any of that? He doesn't rely on making a case. He relies on talking to an electorate out there that, like he said at one point, he could walk down on Fifth Avenue and kill somebody and get away with it. I guess that's what he's going to be doing on a much larger scale very soon.
I'm going to transition to Israel, but before I do, did you know that Congress hates Israel? At least according to Donald Trump, it does. Phil, this is Trump at his maniacal worst or best, however you want to look at it. He's at a Hanukkah breakfast at the, I think it's at the White House. You'll see. You can't make this up. Cut number 5.
You have a Congress in particular, which is becoming anti-Semitic. You have AOC +3. You have those people, Ilhan Omar, she hates Jewish people. And you have to be very careful, because there's been a big change. My father would tell me the most powerful lobby that there is in this country is the Jewish lobby. It's the Israeli lobby. It's not that way anymore. You have a lot of people in your way. You have a lot of people that don't want to help Israel. You have a lot of people in Congress that don't like Israel. You have a lot of people in Congress that, in a way, I think, Mike, we could say it, right? You're there. You're doing an amazing job, Mike Lawler. They hate Israel. It's less so in the Senate, but the Senate's starting also. Bad things are happening. And then you see what goes on in Australia, or October 7th. How about October 7th? And then you have people that deny it ever happened. How about the people that deny, like they deny the Holocaust, but you figure, well, that's just many years. Well, October 7th is not many years at all. We're not going to let that happen. While I'm president and the DOJ and Army, we're not going to let it happen. But please be vigilant and careful, because you have some bad people that are now in Congress that were unthinkable to be in Congress 12, 13, 14 years ago, 15 years ago.
So I want to pause it because Trump does something there that shows you just how deceitful that he is. When he says some people deny that it ever happened, he and others, Barry Weiss does the same thing. They bring up straw man arguments. They bring up the most absurd, very rare example of something and claim that somehow is the mainstream of their opponent's argumentation. When the argument is that Hamas was paid by the West, including Netanyahu, including the United States, that the Palestinians are the Semitic people there, that the Ashkenazi Jews who got planted there took the land, and it's been an occupation there since 1947, and it was plotted out decades before that by Western colonial forces, and thousands of people have been killed every month there since October 7th, and that the Israeli forces were probably responsible for the majority of the deaths that day, as Hamas utilized defensive operations to go against the aggressors in the occupation. But Donald Trump doesn't want to deal with those facts because he gets $250 million from Mrs. Adelson, who bailed him out when he was in a bunch of economic trouble. And of course, they flew the worst spy of Israel in American history, Jonathan Pollard, back to Israel on her husband's jet. That shows you what Donald Trump thinks about patriotism. If you want to be red, white, and blue, right? This whole fight thing, right? Fight. What are you fighting for? You're fighting for Israel. That's what you're fighting for. You're fighting for corruption. You're not fighting for a federalist system, the Constitution, due process, or anything. And of course, if you're Jeff Cooner and you're in the audience and you say that natural rights only applies to Americans, well, you can just jump into a big pool of crap, man, because you got no concept of what natural rights are. And remember that sometime when you go to another country and they decide to cage you and you claim you've got rights to due process and habeas corpus, they'll spit and laugh in your face because you're a hypocrite. That's what you are. And there are very few things worse than hypocrites, especially on a political level. But the polis is the machinery of hypocrisy. The polis is hypocrisy in action. The polis is driven by people who tell you that they're going to create something that will protect you against incursions by other people. And the only way that they can make this wonderful rainbow machinery to protect you is, of course, to attack you and threaten you. Go back to Phil Girardi and the judge.
Must be speaking of a different Congress. Could he be talking about the Congress that gave Netanyahu 56 standing ovations in a 58-minute speech?
Yeah, well, the thing is that he is he's a creature of the Israel lobby and of the state of Israel and Benjamin Netanyahu, and he's going to say what they want him to say. And the argument that they're trying to twist now is because people are waking up, ordinary American citizens are waking up to the fact that Israel is, in a sense, our enemy in terms of what it has created in terms of policies that American presidents and Congress have felt they have to support. People are waking up to that. Now, suddenly, this is all anti-Semitism. This is hatred of Israel. This is hatred of what the people in Israel are doing, and so on and so forth. And the fact that Israel, in fact, has been carrying out a genocide for well over a year and has killed maybe as many as 300,000 or 400,000 Palestinians, most of whom are women and children. This doesn't seem to affect Donald Trump at all. It was like when before this alleged ceasefire was put into place, whenever he would speak about the issue in the Middle East, he would talk about the Israeli hostages. Well, there were 20 of them, and he had tremendous empathy for those 20 hostages. But 20,000 dead Palestinians were nothing to him. This man is a monster. This is a guy who will do whatever Israel wants him to do, and it will not be good for us.
I cannot stress the stark importance of exactly what he has said. Exactly. This is a crucial moment in my life. It's a crucial moment in the lives of many people, not just in the United States, but in Venezuela. It's a crucial moment to pull the curtain down away from people's eyes, to show them what Lindsey Graham is like, to show them what that sort of rhetoric is like in the halls of that Congress. Utterly meaningless. A terrorist state. That means nothing. There's no declared war. The Russians are responding to your actions, Mr. Graham.